Atención Guatemala. Radio Liberación la emisora.
There's a huge invasion force poised on the border. The army had better get out. Our men had better get out. Everybody take cover.
Y decíamos que sí, que claro que sí. Eran nuestras.
And we say yes, of course, our columns are advancing. And there were 20 men, directed by Eduardo Taracene de la Serna, who took Miramundo. And those were our columns.
Que tomó Miramundo. Y así esas eran nuestras columnas.
The CIA's rebel army numbers less than 200. They are poorly armed, they lack transport. A shadow army. Just another weapon in the propaganda war.
Propaganda takes the place of armed combat, takes the place of bloodletting. You don't need to do it. If your enemy will surrender, if he's rendered incapable of independent action, then that's what you want.
Journalists arrive on the Honduran border. They are refused entry into Guatemala. A public relations firm, hired by United Fruit, hands out daily news bulletins, body counts from the front.
I knew they were all lies.
Evelyn Irons is reporting for the London Evening Standard. She finds the entire setup suspect.
You just have to knock 3 times and ask for Charlie, you know. It was very mysterious. And you got inside and there was a sort of conference room and a couple of 3 men there, and I didn't know who they were. And they just gave you these handouts from, you didn't know where they were from. And they said that in my first night, I heard them say, 200 killed today.
Irons wants proof. She wants to see the bodies. She hires a donkey and a guide to take her across the mountains to where Castillo Armas and his rebel army are camped. When Irons arrives in the rebel camp, her suspicions are confirmed.
They weren't taking any action at all. They were simply hanging about. I wanted to go and see about this famous battle in the night with the 200 dead soldiers lying about. But I got to look around, and I could only find 7 corpses scattered all over by the road and all the rest of it. And none of these peasants knew which side they were on.
The real battle is in Guatemala City. In the capital, the CIA wages a psychological war against Arbenz. American planes flown by CIA pilots strafe the city.
The airplanes really scared them to death. The diving planes firing their machine guns really cleared the streets in Guatemala City.
Yo estaba arreglando parte del tejado de mi casa. Cuando vi pasar
I was fixing the roof of my house, and I saw a plane, and after a while I heard some shooting. I didn't know exactly what it was, but the reality is, after a while, it was known that it was the first liberation plane. A plane, a T-47, we call it sulfato, you know, laxative, because all the people who were on the terrace of the palace shooting, they got sick to their stomachs.
Se pusieran malos del estómago.
And it was a sort of a terror that these people had never experienced before.
For Arbenz, the planes signify something much more disastrous. He sees them as the prelude to an American invasion.
This was an incredible game of chicken, in a way. And there was no reason for Arbenz or anyone else to think that the government would blink. You're talking about Dwight D. Eisenhower. He led the largest amphibious invasion in military history. This guy is going to be deterred from landing a couple troops in Guatemala?
Arbenz needs the international community to step in and protect Guatemala from the United States. He appeals to the United Nations.
Es que no había de otra. No había ningún otro foro para donde cruzar.
There was no other choice, no other way, nowhere else to turn. The only way was the United Nations. We only had that forum left to denounce what was happening in the country and the interference from the United States.
John Foster Dulles is determined Guatemala will be shunned by the United Nations. U.S. Representative Henry Cabot Lodge pressures the other Western powers to vote with him against Guatemala's request for international observers. In the end, only the Soviet Union supports Arbenz. Lodge uses the occasion to issue a stern warning to Moscow.
The Soviet Union has got designs on the American hemisphere. Stay out of this hemisphere, and don't try to start your plans and your conspiracies over here.
It's a very sad thing that when a government appeals for help, and the international body that is supposed to provide succor turns a deaf ear.
He's a basket case. He's finished. He's tried everything that he can think of, and he's come up empty.
In Guatemala, La Voz de la Liberación aims its propaganda at the Guatemalan military, Arbenz's last hope for survival.
Nuestros servicios especiales de inteligencia infiltrados en todas las ramas del ejército. Actividades de los traidores a la patria, los estamos denunciando ante la opinión pública guatemalteca.
The military was no less immune to these types of psychological games that were being played than Arbenz was.
Arbenz jamás pensó que el ejército.
Arbenz never thought the army was going to turn its back on him.
Nunca.
He never thought, never, that the army would do a 180-degree turn.
180 grados.
Worried about the loyalty of his officers, Arbenz sends an envoy to the front.
Y Arbenz le preguntó, ¿qué dicen allá los jefes militares?
Arbenz asked him, what do the military leaders say? He said to him, excuse me, Mr. President, but I'm going to report to you the exact words of the military leaders. They said, you can go to hell.
I think the fact that losing the army support is what undoubtedly was the last straw. That really brought him down.
Arbenz remains closeted in his office all day. He is paralyzed by despair. The man whom the CIA had once described as brilliant, cultured, is a wreck.
He himself was weaker than people suspected. In fact, there was some suspicions that all this pressure was aggravating a kind of alcoholism which he had had bouts with before.
Arbenz's most trusted officer, a former student from the military academy, Colonel Diaz, meets with Ambassador Purifoy to see what can be done. William Krieg hears the colonel's question.
What can you do to call off Castillo Armas? And the ambassador said, I think that Arbenz would have to resign. I think he would have to go.
Diaz offers himself as a replacement for Arbenz. Purifoy agrees, and Diaz leaves to break the news to Arbenz.
Purifoy was most duplicitous with Diaz because he was not going to have Diaz take power. He was simply using Diaz as a first weapon to get rid of Arbenz.
Arbenz agrees to resign only if he can publicly hand over power to Diaz, and if Diaz promises to continue with his reforms.
Que Arbenz se veía obligado a renunciar porque ya no contaba con el apoyo del ejército.
Arbenz felt obligated to resign because he no longer had the support of the army, and because he could leave a man in power who would safeguard the gains of the revolution.
We never were able to get inside Arbenz's mind, but what difference did it make, really? He left, and his motivations really between him and God and his wife.
June 27th, 9 p.m., Arbenz resigns, unbowed.
En nombre de qué hacen esas barbaridades, ¿cuál es tu bandera? Han tomado de pretexto al comunismo. La verdad hay que buscarla en los intereses financieros de la compañía frucera, temiendo que el ejemplo de Guatemala se propague a los hermanos países latinoamericanos.